Yeah. Just waiting for my guy Leo. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I actually got a little time to do some extra work. I got rid of that bad boy. Still have some cleanup to do, but whew, that tank has never needed less attention. uh, Man, you guys can be such a pain sometimes. You know that? I know, it's incredible. You can't see the water line, can't even see the fish, the plants, nothing. It's the most incredible aquarium ever. The water is so crystal clear, you can't see anything. Oh man. Last week, if you weren't here, or if you didn't watch the replay, I had a kind of fun story. I hope you go watch it. But basically, I got some repair done, and then my rental car was stolen. Pretty fun. Is that a Corgi hat? Specifically, it is a Cowboy Bebop hat, and that is the Corgi that is in Cowboy Bebop, Ein. But yes, my mother got me this hat because she knows I'm both an anime nerd who loves Cowboy Bebop, and of course, I own corgis. So there are many corgi things around my house that my mom has gotten for my wife and I. I think my favorite one is this. It's this little like metal short small poster that's like street sign size. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but has a corgi kind of looking over its shoulder with its butt in your face, but is telling you to have a seat. It specifically says hello there, sweet cheeks. Take a seat, and it's right over the toilet in the bathroom. It's the kind of humor my mom has, but yeah, yeah. Oh, Kingfisher's catch, Corgi or Duck Taller, already a border collie owner. So you're used to the energy, right? And then we'll get into the topic. You're used to the energy. Corgis bark at everything, and because they have that really strong double coat, even the ones that have fairly short fur, like my Papa Limo, they still shed like crazy. I find corgi hair everywhere, and you're a little used to that with border collies, but corgi's double coat is like the shed demon. There are a few things that are worse, and I mean, you have to start getting into some of your very long furred dogs, right? Like Akitas and some of that stuff, where they just have super fluffy fur that they're constantly shedding if you're remotely warm. But I will say this: if you want like a couple years in your dog to be an absolute cuddle monster, that's a corgi. Corgis, for everything I know, or at least from everything I've experienced, especially male corgis. This is really prevalent with male corgis after they've gotten out of that like young energy. But if they spend a lot of time being held or petted or kind of a lap dog, they will be like that forever. So Papa Limo, like when I go to sit in the chair downstairs by his mom, he immediately jumps into my lap and crawls like right here on my chest. He tries to sleep right here on mom's chest, on my wife. Where like my girls who are part corgi, they have a little more Shiba in them as far as personality, and they're not as like super cuddly. But if I pick up Shantoto, if she lets me pick her up, she will just flop like a little baby and want to be cradled and held. She won't struggle, nothing like that. It's very interesting. But yeah, I have no experience with duck tallers, so couldn't tell you there. I guess it would depend. I suppose if you were doing a lot of aquatic things, it would be very interesting. Yeah, there's my 2 cents. I love corgis. They just bark a lot. They're very vocal little dogs, and they will be inside your feet at all times. When you're walking, they're going to be like right in your ankles. So if you're not so sure-footed, maybe avoid the corgi. But then again, if you have ponds, maybe the duck taller is not as appealing for certain fears, because they want to get up in there, right? Just thoughts. Those are my thoughts. So my thoughts. Could do an Aussie. They're crazy. They're fun. All right, let's do topic. So, which by the way, thank you to Vibes for the $2 Vibes super chat. I love that you have a sticker that is basically perfect for you, and Zen Ginger for being a 20-month member. Thank you, thank you. All right, so let's talk this topic for a little bit. First, let's kind of define what we associate to be a biotope aquarium. So biotopes are usually, and this is, the definition is fairly broad if you ever look it up on Google, but it's basically keeping organisms that all live in the same area. So usually we would think of that as like, let's say we went to, Ivan McColgy does this a lot. He recently spoke down at the Findig in California, the Sacramento area, right? He has a number of videos where he's got this amazing underwater footage, or he's gone and built biotope aquariums by literally getting rock and sand and pieces of, whether it's wood or whatever happens to be there, leaf litter, in one spot, in a stream, a river, what have you, and getting fish from that spot and creating a little interesting biotope aquarium, right? That's maybe what most of us picture in our head. All these things that live in one area together. If you were to do that for rainbow fish, as an example, you would very rarely have multiple rainbow fish together. But you might have a species of rainbow fish, and if you're looking Australians, you might have something like some gudgeons, because there's a number of the water systems where there's gudgeons and rainbows in the same system, right? Or maybe you'll have some of the other kind of interesting, not silversides, that's the wrong one. There's other fish similar to a silverside that are prevalent in a lot of the areas where rainbows live in stream systems in Australia, as an example. If you were looking native to the United States, you might have shiners and darters in the same aquarium and be very cool water, very stream oriented, like river rocks and things like that. Here's where this gets a little less defined, and what we see more commonly. We will often see something like a Rio Negro biotope. So that's Amazonian. It's a very specific river in the Amazon water system, known for that darker tannic water. But here's the thing. Very rarely when we see biotopes built of a specific water system, say like the Rio Negro, and there's a million different tributary systems you can use. What you will often run into a problem is that that river is 1,400 miles long almost. It's 1,370 something miles that it covers. It's an enormous river. And what you'll find is people will go like, oh, well, that fish is in the Rio Negro somewhere. And that fish is also found in the Rio Negro somewhere. And they'll combine a lot of these things and maybe certain plants that are in such different portions of the water system that they don't actually live together. But we can still classify that as a biotope. And there are people that go even broader. So a member of my club is really, really knowledgeable. He absolutely loves his fish. And for a big period of time, he focused on only biotope aquariums, right? So every aquarium was some biotope. And he had like a Lake Tanganyikan biotope, a Lake Malawi biotope. But as we know, those lakes are freaking enormous. And you can have the same species of fish in that lake, but in completely different locations. And they look very different. You know, there are different peacocks or whatever that are the same species, but we keep catch locations because they show different colorations, right? These are some of the things that can occur. And this is very similar to, say, rainbows, although usually they're completely different water systems. You're not really dealing with water with these massive lakes like you have some of the African Great Lakes, right? But you'll have a Bozeman eye rainbow, but depending on its catch location, it has very different coloration and maybe slightly different size. So the question that I will pose to you guys is, do you feel that as long as it's the same water system and it's in the spirit of the concept of biotope, that that's an actual biotope aquarium? So my example here would be a member of my club that I was talking about, right? One of his aquariums was an Indonesian aquarium. Now think about that for a moment, because that all of a sudden is a fairly large area. And let me explain some of the fish that he kept. Dwarf chain loaches, prey cox rainbow fish, some gudgeons. None of these fish live together in any natural water system. But all the plants, and the plants came from different portions of Indonesia where none of these fish lived either, which is the other funny part. But in seeing the tank together, he had done some big studies and stuff like that and looked at the types of environment they live in. So he tried to get a substrate that matched similar for many of these fish, so that they would be in a kind of the right substrate. Similar types of rock and wood, not importing stuff, but finding river stones that matched a lot of the photography and things he could find. So if you were to ask me, one, it was a beautiful tank. He entered it in our club's home show. It was really, really pretty. A lot of people appreciated it. I certainly did. It had rainbow fish, and you guys know that I have, mostly through my wife, become a massive fan of loaches and their silly behavior. So seeing like dwarf chain loaches instead of what he would normally like. John, you're beating me to the punch. Quit it. He's beat me to the punch. Normally, a lot of us rainbow fish love Corgis and rainbows together. They live together so well, but they're complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So he tried to find a fish that was closer and chose dwarf chain loaches for a similar thing. He wanted them to mess with the sand, prevent the likelihood of any kind of algae buildup in the sand itself, things like that, right? So would we call this a biotope, or, John Ebsen, biotype? There's a small important difference. And what I will say is this: do we really care? No. What we care about is, does that person enjoy their aquarium, right? I think that's the most important thing, is whoever builds this biotope or biotype, whichever you want to go for. If you want to be a real big stickler, you're probably like, that's a biotype aquarium versus saying a biotope. But I can say that I only know one person that I've ever met, and he's a true-blooded scientist, really nice person who is a little picky about the wording, but that's because this is a person who's like done stuff in the wild a bunch and is like fisheries biologist and all this kind of stuff. Works out in the water systems in Washington State, so he's a little more super science minded, so he prefers very specific terminology because that's his field, right? Does he care? No, not really. He's more trying to educate. That's his way, right? And bless him for it, because he's a sweet person. So biotypes are kind of what we're talking about. The Aquarium Domain has a Southern Hemisphere biotype aquarium. He has massive mixtures of fish in one of his tanks. He's got his rainbow fish in, right? And it's kind of similar to the biotope that my friend made. But all the fish are happy. They're healthy. And if the owner appreciates and loves their aquarium, and others of us can come and see something that we find interesting, for one reason or another, maybe you find it interesting that they did this work to try and keep things together that are of a similar region in the world, area in the world, maybe even country in the world, if you're getting really specific, right? But does it really matter? No. Are we always going to probably call them biotopes and not get super specific? Absolutely. And does that matter? No. Why do I talk about this? I think that people who build biotype or biotope, whichever term you want, we're not going to be super specific here. I keep getting distracted. My antivirus, I have not renewed it. And it keeps popping up warnings at me because it just expired like a day ago. And I've just been lazy. It's like, give me money. Leave me alone. But what I would say is, here's what matters. I find that when I try to keep not perfectly biotope, but more fish of a similar demeanor together, in the sense of like, you can even do like rainbow fish and Corridoras. Well, Corridoras are a bottom feeder. They don't necessarily care, and they tend to be pretty comfortable with those big idiot rainbows swimming above them because they know, there's no predators, and they're not messing with me. So I tend to see better behavior out of them. And that's not even a biotype. But if you do narrow it down to those biotypes and maybe even biotopes, like maybe you've got Corridoras with some tetras, and you know that they're in a very close, similar region to each other. Plecostomus is from those regions. You end up seeing cooler behavior. And very often that behavior is something very similar to what I was saying, like the Corridoras will be out and more active if they see something like a school of tetras constantly out and active above them. Because in nature, they know that means no predators are around. And you're safe to kind of move and motor about, find food, do whatever you would do naturally when you're not afraid of a predator. And that's where I think the biotope or biotype, whichever term you want to use, I don't care. Somebody might. Dr. Mazerall, the Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes, might care just a touch. Just a touch. He's too nice a guy. I doubt it. But I think you get to see cooler behavior. And if you are really digging into this hobby and you're turbo nerding out, people like me, people like my friend who was really into biotopes for a while, guys like Ivan McColgy as an example. There's also this great channel, I actually kind of want to give him some love, called The Biotopes. Totally unprompted. I looked it up randomly. So it was like, if I look up Biotope Aquarium on YouTube, how many am I going to see? And most of them are on his channel. So if you ever want to see a reasonable example of what we would generically call biotope, check him out. Small channel. He's like 700 subscribers. Teeny tiny. Let's give him some love. What matters, I think, is that if you want to dig in a little deeper and start learning that little extra bit about nature, because either one, that concept of seeing that more natural behavior is interesting to you. And that's me. I'm the guy at this point in my hobby who loves seeing certain behaviors in my fish, which is why more and more you guys will notice when I keep a lot of tanks, I really start keeping singular species, basically put. Now I have some support fish in a given tank, but if I'm going to do a rainbow fish tank, obviously it's me, I'm going to do rainbows, right? But when I do my rainbow fish tank, it's all one species of rainbow. Outside of my retirement aquarium, I basically don't have any mixed species tanks anymore. Because I've noticed that when I keep all one species with slightly higher numbers, I see different behavior. And that behavior is fascinating to me. Like my big example, okay? I have a group of Melanitania Gary Langi, right? The fish name for my personal aquatic hero, Gary Lang. They're still growing. They're all about like yay big right now, the biggest males, and they're kind of longer, right? As a fish, they've got a more they have less of that like big chunky body than some of the other Melanitanias do. But what I've noticed is when it's just them at their size, they do certain little behaviors. Like they'll dart in and out of all the bulbitis I have in their tank because they're still small enough to easily dart in and out of it. But in certain times of day that normally in a mixed species aquarium I would not associate with it's the time to flare up and show off, they flare up and show off almost all day. Especially anytime I come in because they assume it's food time, and they all come to the front of the tank, and they're sitting there fluttering, and the boys start sparring a little bit because they're getting all excited, right? Because food time, and then usually right after that's when you're trying to court the females, and you got to look handsome. But when I go over to my running river fish, my Gary Lang eyes are darting all over the place. They're all over this kind of loose but interactive school with each other. I go over to my running river tank with my running river rainbows, and they're this big cohesive unit. And even though I've lost some of my originals and got some new ones from a friend who are similar size but a little younger, that new group, when I introduced them, they all just became one big coherent unit. A lot like what we see out of, say, like emperor tetras or rummy nose tetras as an example. They're very tight schoolers. But I've watched other tanks where they have running river rainbows and they only have a few of them, and they don't tightly school with any other fish. They know their kind and they stay together. Where, like, you can put mixed tetras together, like neons and cardinals, and they'll all interlace and be fine. And rainbows will interlace a little. But those running rivers, that behavior, they're such tight schoolers. They're way different in their schooling behavior than most of the other rainbows I've ever kept. And that is the thing that really gets to me, is that when you get into biotopes, you start seeing different behaviors. Not necessarily perfectly, but there's little things you'll start noticing, and that, for me, that is the biggest appeal. And I'm curious, for those of you who have done a biotope, we'll walk through comments in just a sec here and kind of catch up on chat, but what is the thing that when you've done a biotope was the most, whether it was enjoyable or satisfactory or maybe vindicating, like, I did this for a reason and this is why, and when I got to see this or when this happened, I felt amazing, right? Whatever that is, that's what I want to hear from you guys. All right, we'll catch up with the chat, because I know I'm behind, because I'm always behind, let's be honest. From Dr. Mazerel, hard to do a true biotope unless you have been there and actually seen what is in that particular waterway. Yes. And I mean, like, my example earlier was kind of somebody like Ivan McColgi, when he's done some of those things where he's literally gone into the water system and pulled stuff out and made a biotope tank that was lightly aquascaped. But true biotopes are very difficult. Again, I think you hit the nail on the head. Unless you've been there and seen it, or like if you had video from someone who's been there as an example, or you know someone who's gone to a lot of these places and they tell you, well, these are all of the fish that were present, right? Unless you have that level of documentation or expertise, true biotopes are very difficult to do. However, that's where we get into like the more accurate like biotype for terminology. And then, yeah, we're giving it the college try. We're having fun with it. Stephen P. I bet a carpet of pink flamingo crypts in a glowfish tank would turn some heads. Is that a biotope? The all neon biotope? The doesn't look natural at all, but is still kind of interesting biotope? Maybe we could redefine biotope for some really weird use cases, right? You gotta have the rainbow, like, glow in the dark gravel too. Stephen P, what about feeding? Does a true biotope need it? Well, okay. I think if you're trying to go absolutely crazy true, then you would do a lot of live foods. But do you need to get the exact food that they're eating? No. Come on, man. So we're not going that crazy. There are some people who I'm sure would do so. But the likelihood is that in the wild, a massive amount of the gut load that we see in fish that gets studied scientifically is mold. The things that we would normally associate with waste at the bottom of the tank, but it has so many like microorganisms and things that we can't see and all this stuff that they can still turn into food. if you look at a lot of the gut load and basically gut contents of fish, a lot of our ornamental fish at least, is huge amounts of mulm are more present until you start getting to some of the larger predatory fish, and even they tend to have some. So, if you go look at like a neon tetra in the wild, and you were to study the contents of its guts, as far as what it's been eating, you would see a lot of mulm. You'd be surprised. Not a lot of insects or stuff like that, but it's still getting its food. Johnny from Dance Fish. A biotope aquarium is where you get fish from Asia, plants from Africa, and a pleco to clean the algae. Oh, Johnny. I love you, man. You sarcastic bastard. Let's see here. Stephen P. You could technically call a community of all the tetra species a biotope because of the genetic link, or is it more like a mutt guppy tank? It's more of a mutt guppy tank, man. You know better. You try to create like Noah's tetrarch up in this joint? Benjamin Mellor, I don't even focus on biotope. I just get the fish I like as long as they can live together. I think that's most of us, right? Most of us don't care. Like, I love keeping corridors with rainbow fish. They live the entire world across from each other. But when they're together, they live with relatively good harmony. I can't say I've ever seen issues with rainbows and cories together. They all live pretty well. You just got to make sure you're putting the right food in so that everybody gets their food, right? That's easy peasy. That's not difficult. Wei Ming, I would rather be a biotype hobbyist. I'm now bald due to the fact I've been so meticulous that I wasn't enjoying my hobby. Oh, man. Yeah, you can't go that crazy. Benjamin, what do you think of Father Fish? He's a nice guy. I mean, he's fun to talk to when I met him in person up at Keystone Clash. He has been doing a style of aquarium for 40 years, 50 years, a very long period of time. Well, I don't know if he's been doing specifically the like deep sand bed the entire time, but I mean, he's been doing that for a long while, at least 20 years. And what I would say is this: any specialist of any form, whether it's Father Fish, whether it's someone like Gian, who's the betta specialist that has talked a couple times to the Aquarium Co-op membership club. I can't remember. It feels weird calling it a fish club, but you know what I mean. Or someone like, who's say a Corridora specialist, or Odd Conning, who is a African cichlid specialist, right? Whoever it may be, or whether it's just some idiot on the internet who focuses really mostly on one type of fish, or maybe one type of plant, whatever it may be. Specialists of any form, they have a particular set of knowledge. Does it make them right or wrong? No, because everything in this hobby is experiential. The things that are successful for me might not be successful for you, right? Water in a different region, even down the street from my house, can cause things to be, effectively speaking, completely different in a different aquarium. So just because, say, someone doesn't like that method or does like the Father Fish method, doesn't mean that it is right or wrong. What it means is that that is how they have found the most success, and they're trying to share that information with everyone in the hopes that if they follow the same advice, those people can also find success and love the hobby and want to stay in the hobby and continue to be part of the hobby. That's all it is. That's any specialist. Like if I go and I go to, say, my friend Alyssa's house, who Alyssa, often in chat, saw you earlier, hi, does a lot of pleco breeding, right? She currently has a group of my plecos because I know that I'm not the person to get them to breed reliably. She is. And we've gotten one clutch of babies out of them. And they have enormous yolk sacs. Absolutely enormous when they were babies. But The thing is, like, when I go to someone's house like that, or I talk to someone like that, or I talk to someone like Aquarium Domain, who I'm like, yeah, man, my small tank's 40-gallon breeder, and his small tank is like 1,000 gallons, right? It's like he's a specialist in massive aquariums, right? He keeps all sorts of different fish, but he specializes in these massive systems where I specialize in one thing, that person specializes. Our knowledge combined, if you go and listen to everyone, you can find little jewels of information from each person and each way that they do things that could collectively make you make a different decision than if you listen to only one person. If you only watch Father Fish, as an example, you would probably only ever do a deep sand bed aquarium. If you only watched me and thought that I was the only way to do an aquarium, you would always use aqua soil, you would always have a fairly heavily planted tank, and you would probably almost always have rainbow fish. That is the beauty of something like FishTube, YouTube, the internet, is that you can get tons of information from multiple sources and then try stuff. Will you have success with Father Fish's method? Most likely. But is it guaranteed? Nothing is guaranteed. Just because I perpetually can find success doing things doesn't mean that the way that I do it will be successful for you. Is it likely? Relatively. But it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. We are trying to control nature. And when you try to control nature, nature will teach you all sorts of lessons. Some heartbreaking. Others fascinating. And I think that's what's important. So when I'm sorry I'm going a little long on this chat, but like when I get questions like this about what do you think about X one, like especially if it's a specific person, it's my thoughts are more varied than what a simple answer would be. Because someone might be like, "No, he does the deep sand bed method." All right, it's not my jam. That would be the short version. But the long version is there are things to be learned from talking to someone like Father Fish or watching someone like Father Fish, and then going completely the opposite and looking at someone like, say, Green Aqua, where they do these hyper aquascaped, crazy high-end tanks. They're complete opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Father Fish is very simple methodology, but there's some complex stuff going on in what that method does down in the substrate. And then you've got highly aquascaped, crazy, beautiful aquariums. But each has an important lesson to be learned. It's finding those little gems of information, and as you go through your own aquatic journey, finding out when and where they are useful or not. And that usually comes down to trying things, experimenting with things. If you're running into a problem, don't be afraid to try something new or ask multiple people because you'll get multiple answers. I'm terrible at diagnosing disease in fish, but I'm really good at figuring out problems in plants, and usually, even though I have some chagrins about it, helping people fight off algae, because for the most part, I have specialized in a type of fish that doesn't get sick very often, but when it does, it's like one of like 3 things, and lots of plants. And I'm hyper specialized in going bat-esque crazy over plants. So I have a wide breadth of understanding of aquatic plants and a fairly narrow understanding of certain parts of the fish world because I've chosen a very small slice speciality, right? I think that's important to understand. As long as you arm yourself with that kind of knowledge, it almost doesn't matter who you watch. Well, other than like, you know, the obvious people who are doing things that are not good for fish, like we're gonna build a water slide for our fish. Like, come on, don't do that nonsense, right? But you know what I'm saying, guys. You know what I'm saying. All right, the longest answer possible for that question. I hope that though that helped in some way, shape, or form. My weird, crazy philosophies. We'll catch up on chat now. Alyssa, I think there's only the one female, so it's possible they'll only breed once or twice a year. Hopefully when I get things set up, I'll have higher survival rates. Hey, I'm just happy that we saw some fry at one point, right? because that tells us that we've got a good chance, right? We have a chance. So you're saying there's a chance. That's all I care about. I think they're cool fish. I would like to see them more up there. Tyler, you getting them honey blue eyes for brother-in-law James's aquascape? Yeah, no one really answered that particular teaser. I think there's like one person who talked about honey blue eyes. It's not honey blue eyes, I'll tell you that. Mostly because I would prefer to see those fish in other people's hands. And I'm also not super huge on the pseudobagills. But I'm sure brother-in-law James will love him because he loves the color yellow. Stephen P., it can sometimes be difficult to explain why the things that are working are working. And that's another good one, right? There's this great example. I'll take it outside of aquatics. And I'll be like some of our friends in the Northwest. Michael Bay, the film director. There's this great interview out there with him from, it's like 10 years ago now, maybe even longer, where they're showing him shots from different movies. And you'll have him like go, oh, that's a great shot. Or like, they could have done this better. And then they ask him to try and explain it from a technical perspective. And he struggles. He just kind of explains things in a way of feeling as opposed to like technical specification. And you have to admit, like, whether you like his movies or not, the guy is good at producing certain things in cinematography. And that's a lot of us in this hobby. We can be very good at producing certain results, but we might not exactly know the perfect technical reason as to why we're producing those results, right? We just know that we're doing this thing and it's working. But there's so many thousands of variables that it's hard to pinpoint down exactly unless you have a massive scientific background and can really dig in deep, which most of us do not, right? Outside in aquatics, like breeding of pistos, sand substrate, and coca huts. The idea that fish just love to turn the huts into their homes and move leaves to cover the entrance is my favorite stuff to see. Okay, so when I used to have a pair of Pelvicachromis tenuatus, so not the true crib, but what is in the family of cribensis, right? Because the true cribensis is the Pelvicachromis pulcher. One of my favorite things to watch, other than like the little swarm of babies coming out of the coconut hut and then immediately hiding the second the parent was like dodged in front of them and kind of did whatever voodoo magic they do to communicate, was the behavior of when the female is courting the male. Whether or not he necessarily wants to, because sometimes they get frustrated, but ditherfish fixes a lot of problems with that. But just like the little dance they do and the way they color up and all this kind of stuff. And it's so interesting to see compared, because it's the opposite of rainbow fish, right? Rainbow fish, the males are doing all the work as far as courting is concerned. They're doing all the color shows. They're doing the flicker and all that kind of stuff. Whereas cribensis are the opposite. The males sometimes are kind of, but the females look amazing. They get this incredible like purple color in most of them, not all, but big golden yellow stripe. When they do this little shimmy and shake thing, and like literally, I watched my female basically bully the male by slowly forcing him to go certain directions into the coconut hut. Just like, it is the time, we are making the babies, you are getting in there. I remember watching it and just being like, that's really cool. Can't wait to see when the little swarm of babies comes around and what happens afterward, right? Little things like that. They're so enjoyable in this hobby. I think that's part of why this hobby kind of is its own like magical thing. Aquarium domain. I am thinking about putting together a Florida biotope aquarium. That way I could keep pretty much any fish or plant that has ever existed in the hobby. Oh, man. Oh, it's true, though, man. Florida has so many problems with stuff that should not have been released. And Texas, to a certain point, is kind of like that too. Florida certainly worse because of all the fish farms and all those kind of things. But yeah. Gardaki's Playground, Father Fish's religion aspect to the channel is off-putting. I mean, yeah, I guess. Everybody's got their slice of life, right? We all have things that we care about, whether it's our fish, religion, politics, whatever. Everybody's going to talk about something certain different. I tend to let all that stuff not matter to me, and I pay attention. I focus in on the stuff that does matter to me. But that's me. Like, my brain's really good at laser focusing on certain things. That's part of why I do the job I do, right? I can kind of shut out the noise and focus in on patterns or information or whatever and try and find what I'm looking for. But, I mean, here's the thing, right? You're going to watch the things that you enjoy. And that's really what matters in the grand scheme of things, because it's your time. You should not be forced to watch anyone. Me, Father Fish, whoever, right? You shouldn't be forced to watch anyone if you don't enjoy it. You should only watch the things you like. And I thank you for watching me, by the way. It's the most precious thing we all have in life is time. How we choose to spend our time, only we can decide in the grand scheme of things. Especially as we become adults and we have full autonomy over all of our actions. Totally have full autonomy. Never, ever influenced by relationships, kids, pets. Yeah, it's just us, right? Oh, man. Make sure I didn't miss anything else up here. Harim, do you think Brightwell shrimp line would help contribute towards Caridina only biotope? I mean, it certainly can. They have, can I put this? You don't necessarily need, like, the liquid supplements. They do have a powdered buffer for Caridina shrimp. But that's similar, just like Salty Shrimp does, or any of the other companies. Like, almost everybody has a supplement if you're trying to get your water dialed in, especially if you're using, like, say, reverse osmosis water. Really what matters is, can you get the system the way you need it to make sure that they're healthy and making lots of little shrimplets? And are you giving them plenty of food? Because one of my biggest failures in shrimp typically has been underestimating the amount of food shrimp need. Because as a shrimp colony grows, they need a lot more food than we might think. We might think, oh, it's a teeny tiny shrimp, they don't need that much. But they're constantly grazing, constantly eating. And they need certain things in their diet. They need a certain amount of calcium both in the water and in their diet in order to maintain their exoskeleton, right? This is part of it. They technically need a very teeny, minuscule amount of iodine. But if you put a bunch of iodine in the water, you're going to kill them, right? So there's all these things. As long as you follow, there's tons of great shrimp channels out there, whether it's like Mark Shrimp Tanks, Garden of Eater, if you want somebody who's in the States and you're looking at buying shrimp from a specific person, that would be probably where I would go. Yeah, just find a really great shrimp person and kind of watch what they do. Can you use Brightwell stuff? Absolutely. It's a great product. They make a lot of really, really nice stuff. And if that's the easiest for you to acquire, or it's the right price, whichever of the two, I think it's, you pick one, right? And sometimes it's both and you get lucky and that's awesome. But often for me, like, I either choose a product because it does what I need it to do and it's convenient, or it does what I need it to do and it's cheap. And I don't usually do that with equipment, although sometimes I do for testing purposes. But, like, as an example, if I'm going to say if I were to go really hardcore doing lots and lots of plants again, to where I was trying to grow and do like plants for profit and sell plants again or something like that, right? Or I was getting lots of swap meets and I wanted to have way more plants on hand and do all that kind of stuff, I would probably look at a different fertilizer than the one I use currently, because the cost of, say, Easy Green, as an example, compared to certain other fertilizers, I would be spending significantly more money. So if I'm doing this in mass, it would cost me a lot more money over time, where I could look at some other options to give me similar or so almost perfectly exact results that I would know what I'm doing, and it's not necessarily a problem. I'm just saving money in the long run. But there's a big convenience to something like Easy Green because they're right here. They used to ship from right here, so they would get here like next day. It's different now that the warehouse is in Kentucky, being on the West Coast. A lot of you West Coasters know this one, but I can drive up to the store and buy it. So there's that, right? I have that benefit. Where like I can't do that with, say, Nylock G or even the Brightwell stuff, which I do like a lot of the Brightwell product lines for fertilizer, but it's not just like readily available. I have to wait for it, get it shipped, all that kind of stuff. So you got to pick which matters to you most. For me, usually it's a matter of convenience, just because once I figured out I like a product, convenience is usually more important to me than necessarily price, unless the price is like astronomically different. But if like, bottle of fertilizer 1 costs $14 and bottle of fertilizer 2 costs $15, but I get the bottle of fertilizer 2 for that extra dollar like a week faster or with minimal hassle, or maybe I get a better deal on shipping for it, whatever the heck it may be, I'm going to go with bottle 2 because the convenience is nice. This is how I work. What I do isn't perfect for everyone, but it is perfect for me. Oh, man. Catch up with chat again here. Andrew, sounds like my brother trying to get out of water changes with Father Fish. You can't ever... Here's the thing. Depending on your water, you can't ever truly get out of water changes. Inevitably, you will your nitrogen cycle, the natural process of breaking down ammonia into safer chemicals. My brain was like, blah, don't want to word. That inevitably slowly consumes amounts of your carbonate hardness. So eventually, depending on your water, you will need to introduce fresh water from the aquarium, right? And certain plants, you might select plants that don't really consume a ton of nitrates. But if you have a fairly densely packed aquarium, you're going to produce a lot of nitrates. Things like this. Sherelle, I've got to say, I'm a big fan of Alyssa for listening to Corvus Oskin. Joel can be a hoot sometimes, man. I miss that guy. I want to see him. We haven't talked in person since the last big aquarium club auction, but before that, it had been like 9 months. He was really busy and I was really busy, so it kind of makes sense. But like, we haven't just hung out together purposely just for us to hang out in quite a while. So probably need to fix that sometime soon. I'll try to go over there when he gets his fish room like done. I know that'll probably take a while because it's a process, right? He's got more important stuff to do. I want to see it when it's all done because I love that guy's craftsmanship. When he builds stuff, I really appreciate people that are really good at crafting things, whether that's like carpentry, metalwork, whatever. And maybe that comes from just growing up with my dad, my dad is like a wizard with metal. If you were to go look at some of the body work he's done on cars, like Big Car Guy, obviously my name, Car Guy, it is difficult for me to tell where his welding lines are. But he's been doing it for so long that, he's a wizard at it. Or like my uncle, as an example. My uncle has been building wood furniture and cabinetry for like 40 years, 50 years. So when I go see something that he's built, I am almost always in awe of what he can do because he's just been doing it so long and he's very good at what he does, right? So when I see people who are really good at doing particular crafty things, I just have a big appreciation for it. That's part of the reason why I like Joel a lot. When he used to do some of his videos and like how he built fish stands or why he made some of the decisions in his fish room currently that he's making, I find that so fascinating from a perspective of him being a builder of things, right? Because I'm totally not that guy. I am terrible when it comes to DIY. I'm the person who, like, you can put a hammer in my hand and I can put nails in something, but it's not going to be the best. Let's be honest here, right? I'm a use this person, not necessarily a use these person, but can't get stuff done when I absolutely have to. It's just, yeah, it ain't so pretty. Oh man. DC Kyle, Aquarium Co-op goods arriving tomorrow. Dan's Fish arriving Thursday. It's a good week. Nice. What did you get from Dan's Fish? I would assume your Aquarium Co-op goods are to prepare for said fish. So now that immediately puts certain things in my brain, but I'm now curious, what fish did you get? You have to tell me, Kyle. Zen Ginger, are cribs like a pistos where the females are so dominant that they like to unalive the males? Okay, so great question. Sometimes. They're not as bad as a pistos. And the way that you fix this, because when the females are most aggressive, is when they have fry. And the way that you fix this is ditherfish. As an example, my cribbed pair that I had, when I had these scissortail rasboras as ditherfish in the tank, the two parents would bond together and keep the scissortails at bay so that their young would be safe. Or even when they didn't have young, just their territory would be safe. Even though they're not predators at all. They're rasboras. They're very, very peaceful fish. Eventually, I shut that tank down and I moved them to one smaller tank. Big mistake. But two, they were on their own. They went into a 10-gallon on their own. And they had another batch of fry, and what ended up happening is the female no longer was working with the male to keep the ditherfish at bay. She was trying to keep the male away from the babies because she looked at him as the threat. And she harassed him so much he jumped out of the tank through a surprisingly small hole, because I did have a lid, and I lost him. Now, did they ever really damage each other? No, not that I ever saw. And they didn't ever really damage any of the ditherfish either. They're kind of the, like, lots of bark, not a lot of bite type fish. But they can, without ditherfish, have those problems. Which is why, in general, what I would say is anytime you have, whether it's a pistos or cribs of any form, ditherfish are pretty good if you have a big enough aquarium. Me personally, I like 40-gallon breeders, but they don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have like a 40-gallon breeder. A 20-gallon long is usually enough. Even the standard 20-gallon, if you have that extra height, it can do just the trick. And you can use things like plants and stuff to create line of sight blockers and little havens for them to hide if you are, say, trying to do a smaller tank or just the two to make sure that nothing can potentially hurt babies if you have babies. But yeah, they're kind of similar in that fashion, although usually it's like only when they have fry, and then there's no ditherfish, then the female might beat up the male. Pete Berlinski, what happened to Joel working for Corgi? I have no clue. The only thing I know is that he no longer works for Corgi. That's all I know. I didn't ask because I don't want to pick at anything. I don't want to piss anybody off. I have a good relationship with Joel especially, and I cared more the last time I saw him about just chatting, catching up, making sure that him and his wife and his kid are okay, that kind of stuff. Don't know. Have no clue. Raccoon Tetras for my Amazon tank and Empire Gundams for my Rainbow tank. Very nice. Very nice. Raccoon Tetras, I feel like, are starting to get a little more love, and part of that is because of Dan, but they're a really cool fish. They just didn't get a lot of love for a while. Wait, I don't know if you remember a while back about my Hillstream Loach setup. My Biotope type setup consists of river rocks, water flow. Behavior is very different. That doesn't surprise me, especially with any of the Hillstream Loach varieties, because there are several of them, right? Where you give them that higher flow, the kind of rocks they like. I imagine eventually you'll see some breeding. Just because they love those little crevices to kind of hide their fry and spawn in and all that kind of stuff. I've seen in the last like 5 years, I think I've only seen like 3 really good riverish biotope type tanks, and I put that in big quotation marks, but like river system style tanks. Every single one of them had a hillstream loaches in it, because every single person I knew had some variety of the hillstream loach that they really, really wanted to get to breed. They're such cool fish too. Like, I kind of want them in something. I just don't know where I would put them yet, but I like them a lot. Maya, I know it's slightly off topic, but is there a specific reason you aren't crazy about pseudomagills? It's not off topic at all. Okay, so here's my grief with pseudomagills. They're not rainbow fish. No, I'm kidding. I'm not one of those guys. I mean, they're technically not, if we wanted to be like jerks about it. But here's the thing. I really fell in love with most of the bigger rainbows. So what ended up happening is I had to make a choice, because what I've noticed, and I asked some questions of some friends, and this was kind of a recurring pattern when I was looking at pseudomagills at first, is that when you have big rainbows and you try to have pseudomagills in the same tank, the pseudomagills will struggle dealing with the big rainbows, because the big rainbows are big giant idiots, especially around food, and they get so excited anytime food is in the tank that they kind of turn into like slight bullies. And it's not necessarily intentional, although some male rainbows can be kind of intentional bullies. It's more that they're so boisterous and they're so big, the smaller fish tend to shy away a little bit. And for me, as I started getting more and more big rainbows, I just kind of just dug deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole, and ended up in a place where I was just like, I like the behavior of bigger rainbows in general. Now, that being said, there are 3 pseudomagills I really like. I love the Luminatus. They're super popular. It's kind of like the Bozemanii of the pseudomagill world in the sense of how popular they are. But if I were going to have Luminatus, I would probably just get Rhamnocentris, because I get similar color, they're a little bit bigger, and I don't know, I just like the slightly bigger fish. Also, in general, my small tanks in my house are all 40-gallon breeders. I don't really have nano tanks, so I have the space to keep the larger rainbows. If I was trying to focus on, say, like a 20-gallon long, and I couldn't get specifically Melanitania pygmaea, then I would start looking at one of a couple different pseudomagills. Realistically, long-term, I want to eventually keep Pseudomagill cyanodorsalis, which is the brackish and or full saltwater pseudomagill. They're super cool, and you can keep them in macroalgae aquascapes, which to me just is like, I like this concept, but I'm not really to fully commit to saltwater yet. So I gotta wait. But eventually, I will probably try that. Because Cyanodorsalis 1, right up my alley, big amount of blue, big gold stripe, very pretty fish. A little weird and quirky because they like high salinity brackish water and or full-on salt. And then finally, I really love the forktail rainbow. The furcata pseudomagill, I love those things because I feel like they're underappreciated. Of all the pseudomagills I would keep in freshwater, furcata is the most likely. Aloha. Brackish, no plants, though. Very minimal plants, yes. But, so for me, if I were to do Cyanodorsalis, I would go to the basically full salt level, because they can handle that quite well, actually, and do macroalgaes. Because you can get a lot of macroalgaes that look like our freshwater plants, and then you can kind of do your own really cool salty aquascape without doing coral. Because pseudomagills, much like all the big rainbows that I love, are dummies. And they will go right into the sting of the coral and die. So you can't keep them with coral. I mean, I've seen people that have had them in reefs, but they basically like have to hope that they're breeding at a rate that when they lose them, they're replacing themselves. But yeah, macroalgae, Pseudomygillus cyanodosalis. Mmm. Mmm. One day I'm doing that. I've had a couple people try really hard to get me to do it sooner. But I kind of like focusing on the things I focus on right now, and I'm not in a place where I feel comfortable enough going heavy experimentation and trying to get used to full salt water. Related note, the Seattle Aquarium is fantastic. Visited Seattle last week and was amazed at how salty the Puget Sound smells given how far it is from the ocean. I feel like you could just scoop some of it up and have a nifty brackish tank. Yes, so the Puget Sound has a fairly high amount of salinity to it. And it's interesting because again, you hit the nail on the head. It is in a way isolated from the sea, but if you think about it, right, because of the peninsula, it's all connected in the grand scheme of things. So it is proper seawater. It's just kind of the long path to get to it. Instead of like a smaller cove like you'd be more used to, you've got this big peninsula where the water system comes in, which can be amazing for things like whale watching because you can get orcapods and all that kind of stuff, which is totally fun. But yes. Lots of cool things. Alyssa, if you ever do macroalgae, I urge you to get Dragon's Breath from Barrier. It's red macroalgae with fluorescent or what? With fluorescent. Hold up. Dragon's Breath macroalgae. Hold up. Wait a minute. Holy moly, that looks cool. Oh, hold on. Just a minute here. I have to show you guys. If you're not searching, maybe you're not on a device which can do so, I've got to show you this because this is wild. Make some adjustments here. There you are. Okay. Oh my lord, you are like too tiny. Bingo. That should look good, right? Check that out. Bring it back over here. It'll replace our tank. That is Dragon's Breath macroalgae. Woo! Woo! That is like a bulbitis on fire. It's so cool looking. Can't tell me about these things because then I get more interested in trying to do this nonsense, and I've got other stuff I need to focus on right now. It is really cool. Okay, we're gonna hide it. We're gonna hide it from myself. That is so cool. Johnny Best, thank you, man, for the $2 super chat. Oh, man. All right. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything else. We are at time, but let's see. Missy O'Reilly, signifiers hang around the bottom quite a bit, meaning they get the food that makes it past the rainbows at the top. They're also not as small as a lot of the other pseudos. Yeah, signifiers do have a bigger body size to them. I think the biggest problem that I run into is it's surprisingly hard to source signifiers out here outside of, like, say, when Dan's Fish gets them. Now, granted, I know some people, but every time I do that, I'm like, well, but I really want to keep just like this one species. And then I fight with myself. And maybe if I do another bigger community tank of some of the smaller rainbows, so not getting like the really big boys, but things like the Running Rivers or, Chilatharina eleni, they don't get very big in the grand scheme of things. A lot of your like McCullochi rainbows stay pretty small. Kamakas don't get super huge. There's a lot, let's be honest. But Praecox, Ruber Vittata, the red laser, all those kind of those. So the ones that are like cap out around 3 inches, maybe then I'd look at like a group of signifiers in there. But I don't know that I would build only a signifier tank or a tank that could hold 2 species that wasn't purposely trying to recreate something like what happens in where the like Kalitawa were found, because Kalitawa lived in the same water system with 2 other rainbows, and they're all in like the same catch area. They would catch all 3 species in this one net, and none of them are hybridized. So they have this really interesting way of interacting in nature. And it would be interesting to see how that would happen in, say, like, if you ever did like a 480-gallon aquarium, like one of the bigger boys that's not too enormous. We're not talking like crazy nonsense that Corey's got with that 800 or the big 1,400-gallon monster at his store. But, if you start looking at like a 360-gallon or something like that, that's big, certainly, but not like enormous. Maybe that would be interesting to test out. Or if Aquarium Domain changes its 4,500-gallon instead of your predators, just for me. Because you love me. Oh, man. Only way. What happened to Melanitania pygmae in the hobby? Why are they $50 per fish from Dan's Fish now? Does no one keep them? You want the real answer? A lot of people lost them, similar to the not Maccullochi, but the Glossolepis maculosus. And they're actually more difficult to breed than a number of the other Melanitania species. They don't produce a lot of eggs. They can be a little more finicky. And raising them is surprisingly tough. Their eggs, at least from the experience of several of my friends who've tried in Washington, fungus extremely easily. So there's really only like 2 or 3 people in the United States that I know of that are successfully breeding them. And because they make less fry and they're more fragile and they take a while, you tend to see them at higher prices just because price and demand, right? The demand is there whenever you can get them, but it's been tough to get them. Shirley Taylor, I'm in Washington as well. I'm in Olympia, so not far. Hey, I actually go down to Olympia pretty regularly, and occasionally go all the way to that wonderful, wonderful place called Portland to see some of my friends. If you're not a member of the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, I highly suggest checking them out. We do meetings mostly on Saturdays now. Won the war on that one. Which it makes it a little easier to come to a meeting. They're early afternoon. We get great speakers. But even if you are not able to make the meetings, if you are within the state and become a member, you can watch all the talks online. You are a member. Perfect. Even better. If you do come to a meeting next time, Shirley, and you see me, come say hi. Please. Please, please, please come say hi. Let us chat. We'll have a lot of fun. Saw me at the auction. Did you not say hi? Gotta say hi. Just come up and yell at me. I'll remember Shirley. That's a name I'll remember. Mostly because I had a grandma Shirley, and I love that lady because she was wonderful. Wonderful lady. All right. Pygmaeas are stunning. My next bow to collect. Also 2 species Kalitawa and species Lobo I have. I just want the other, which it'd be the Lenguru, which is like the one that is... The Lobo is kind of the one that's like the least appealing, but then some people see the other way around. It's where the Lenguru is the least appealing. I don't know. I think they're all interesting. I think they're all cool. But all right, gang. Johnny, let me answer this question because you've asked it a couple times. I'm sorry. Can you do an underground filter with just Fluval stratum? Yes. Especially if your goal is just to get better water flow and pull nutrients down to the root systems of, say, like a lot of crypts or some swords or very heavy root feeding plants. If your goal is to try and do like anoxic stuff, you probably want something slightly different than Fluval stratum. You could have a layer of something with Fluval stratum as a cap. I've even seen Kevin Novak do that in some of his tanks, but I think you would want something slightly different as your base because you need something that's not inherently nutrient charged to act as your base for doing all that kind of stuff. But if you just want an underground filter to move water down through the roots of your plants and thus bring nutrients down to them, absolutely you can do that. Absolutely. All right, gang. I want to thank everybody for showing out tonight. I know it's hotter than Hades out for most of us. So the fact that you're inside, not enjoying the nice weather, and also probably not burning to death, I greatly appreciate you. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.